Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Essence of the Shokunin. This is a series dedicated to Japanese craftsmanship. My name is Gianfranco Chicco, and I'm an experienced designer and Japanophile. I will be your co-host today. We have a very special session dedicated to Japanese textiles. We'll be talking about the craft of Ise Katagami, the making of the paper stencils used to create elaborate patterns for dyeing textiles. We'll do a virtual tour of Katakoto No Kai's 5th annual exhibition in Tokyo. Ise Katagami is a stencil pattern that is essential to create the meticulous designs seen on kimono, such as Edo Komon. It's a technique that's used, for example, for the Edo Komon patterns, or on indigo-dyed yukata, which is the Japanese summer wear. And if you've seen kimono or yukata with intricate and delicate patterns, then you've probably seen examples of Ise Katagami. And in this tour, you'll find out how they are made entirely by hand. Katakoto No Kai is a unique collective of people. You have textile craftspeople, artisans, designers, writers, and photographers who came together to spread the culture of textile craftsmanship and its value in everyday life, focusing on younger craft generations as well as techniques like Ise Katagami, which has been practiced for over 1200 years. My co-curator today is cultural translator and crafts expert Tomo Yoshisawa, who is in Tokyo to guide us through this very special preview of the Katakoto No Kai exhibition. On to you, Tomo-chan.
To everyone tuning in from Europe, and こんばんは、日本の皆さん。Good evening to those who are tuning in from Japan and also Australia. And I'm really happy to invite you all into Katakoto No Kai 5th annual exhibition. But this is it is annual exhibition, but this is actually our first time in 3 years have been able to have this actual venue, because last year only we could do it online, and the year after that we couldn't even hold an exhibition. So you can feel the excitement in the air. We just finished the installation, getting ready for tomorrow's opening. ちょっとカメラ回してもらえる? If you could pan, there's all craftsmen who actually stayed on to see say hello, こんにちは. So we stayed on to be present for your Zoom session. Okay, so we are happy that all of you have joined in. Shall I get you through the exhibition?
Yes, please.
Yes. This is Edo Komon, the first of these 3 works. This is beautiful colors and patterns. This is Japanese style of sarasa chins. And next to it, another kataism stencil dyed patterns. And as you can see, all of the works we have seen so far, they use Ise Katagami stencil dyeing as a technique, but each one falls onto a different style. So as you already explained, Katakoto No Kai is a unique collective of craftsmen using different materials, different techniques, but we all came together for love of Ise Katagami stencil paper. And also another focus is for us to support the younger generation to come into textile culture. So you can see so the younger side of craftsmen, she's like experimenting with traditional style, incorporating more of like art element to it. And here we come. John, I think it's a good idea to start this session with one question, because I know you know so much about ceramics and woodwork, and I'm trying to get you a little bit out of your comfort zone. So ちょっとこの両方映してもらえますか? So there are 2 works in front of you.
Yes, I can see them.
Yeah, one on the left, one on this beautiful blue textile. And when you're talking about Japanese textile, textile either falls onto one or the other category, big category. One is woven, another is dyed. And I used to think they are both dyed and woven, but if you could guess which one falls onto the woven one and the other, which one of these falls onto the dyed one, can you guess?
I was not expecting a test, but let me try. I mean, I would say that this one you're showing now is woven, just because I can see, the threads on the side, and the other one is dyed. But I hope I got it right.
Yes, you got it. You passed the first test, and I hope the audience actually passed the test too. So yes, so it's the woven and dyed. It essentially refers to how the patterns are made, and when it's woven, you have to pre-dye the threads before weaving. So for you to weave out the patterns, and these dyed textile, you have plain cloth first, woven already, and apply Ise Katagami or stencil paper to dye patterns on top of it. And the craftsman I'm going to introduce you now is Matsubara Nobuo-san.
こんにちは、松原です。
He's the master craftsman of dyed textile. よろしくお願いします。So he is particularly focused on a technique called Nagaita Chugata. We are going to explain that a little bit later on. His grandfather is renowned living national treasure for this particular style of Nagaita Chugata, which uses 6.5 meter, just one chunk of fir tree board when he dyes textile.
And I think I have an image I can share of the board. If you give me just 1 second.
Great. 長板中型の説明で今ちょっとどういった、写真をお見せしていて。
So now I'm showing an image of this 6.5 meter long board. Now, why 6.5 meter long? Why such a long board?
なんで 6.5 メートルなんですか？
長板自体ですね。日本の着物の長さが大体12メーターから13メーターの長さがあるんですけれども、それの半段分の長さが6メーター半、大体それぐらいということで、自分でこう担げる長さ、限界の長さになりますね。
So when you are producing the entire textile needed to make this one piece of kimono, actually I'm wearing his work today. You actually need 12-13 meters of textile just for this one piece of kimono, and 6.5 meter is probably the longest, the biggest you can get for one person to be able to have on his shoulder. Because after, can you come back to place your camera back onto us, Jan?
Yes, there you are.
Yes. So I have this sample of Ise Katagami in my hands, and the patterns are different. But essentially, 染めるっていうことはこういうことですよね。
そうですね。型紙は大体こういう形で。
横ですね。
これでこう繰り返していく。
So you have to do repetition on placing these patterns onto the white cloth, essentially to dye patterns onto it.
柄が違いますけども、長板中型の場合は浴衣の染め方のことなので、表からの柄と裏からの柄を別々な作業が必要になります。
Okay, so Nagaita Chugata is specially focused on yukata in the cotton Japanese summer wear. And what they do, they specialize in, well, I don't have the exact same pattern today, but they dye pattern onto this side first, like that, holding it, and just dye one side. And you have to have exact same pattern on the other side, dyed at the same time.
So you're applying the stencil on both sides, right? You do one
both
first,
you have
right, and then on the other one.
Exactly. To be more precise, you have to apply register paste first in order to dye in indigo after. Maybe you can give them another visual aid where he's applying register paste.
Yes, here I'm showing an image of the paste being applied.
Yes, you can see that the paste is tinted red, right? Yeah.
原材料がわかるかしら。
When I said paste, do you know what they are made of?
No.
わからないそうです。
はい。もち米の粉から作るのりと、ぬかから作るぬかかき、それには石灰も入ります。あとは水、この3種類だけです。
はい。So it's powder of sticky rice and the rice brown, and limestone ashes and water. So all mixed together to create this register paste. And it's tinted red, so you can see where the patterns are placed, because you have to have the perfect alignment on the other side when you dyed it, when you actually put the register space on the other side. So red is just for the craftsman to see the trace of patterns. If
And
that
will
makes
the
sense.
dye stick to the white parts on the cloth, or those that are covered in the paste?
その糊っていうのが白い部分になるってことですよね。
染まらない部分を作る。
You got it exactly right. So the where we place the red tint register space, that's going to come out completely white when it's finished.
表と裏と合わせて。
And both on on both sides.
And now I'm showing an image of him doing the dyeing. I think this is traditional indigo. Is that right?
Yes, that's he's soaking the textile in indigo bath. Before moving into the soaking in an indigo bath, he has to place, it's kind of like a soya milk, crushed soya beans in water, and he brushes them on top of the register pasted cloth so the color stays on the cloth well. そういうご自論塗るっていうのはそういうことですよね。色がつくようっていう。So that's another process coming in before moving into the dyeing process. Many layers of process coming onto this.
And how long does it take from the moment he decides to start applying it on cloth until the cloth is final and then someone can use it to make a kimono?
今写真で見せた初めのその 6.5 メートルの板にまっさらなっていうところからここに来るまでに大体どれぐらいかかるんですかね。そうですね。やっぱり長板中型の場合は天気にすごく左右されるので、天気がいい時を狙って10日から1週間ぐらいかかるかな。So it's up to 10 to 2 weeks. You really have to, it relies on the weather as well. It has to be on the sunny days. They actually bring out in the wide field to dry it completely under the sunshine. You have in a rainy season it might take longer. And I think that's also interesting thing because his grandfather started off this in the middle of Tokyo. If you imagine that place where they can hold 6.5 meter long board in a garden in Tokyo, it's such a luxury thing right now. So that's why he and his father moved to Chiba for a more spacious in order to have spacious studio.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, so I've seen Ise Katagami applied and stuff, and it's fantastic, how delicate the patterns, but also the detail. Now, I wonder, in these days of a lot of industrial production, what is his take on it? What is the value of going through all this efforts to make these textiles?
もうこの質問、本当にこれだけの綿密な模様を作り出してでこれだけの苦労を重ねて模様を出すっていうの例えば今印刷でインクジェットでいくらでも模様ができるこの世の中でそういった過程を踏んでものづくりをすることの意味ってどういうことだと思いますか？もともとこの長板中型は、浴衣染めの一番今残っている中でも古い紐ですけれども、そういった仕事が日本にあったということは日本人としてはやっぱり知るべきだし残す必要があるというのはやっぱり国の考え方として、しっかりそこは保護されているので、やれるうちは続けていきたいなと思ってます。はい。その中でやっぱり新しい試みとかそうですよね。やっぱり片言の会に入っているメンバーは、そういったもともとの昔からの伝統技法というものを守りながらも新しいこと何かできないかということを探っているところが、楽しめているのかなと思うので、はい。So Nagaita Chugata is one of the oldest methods to dye yukata, the summer garments for Japanese people. And as a Japanese, it's really important to know that there was such technique existed and such culture existed. And that's why Japan as a government is actually support people who actually keeping that tradition. And also, as you can see, Katakoto No Kai is also about learning the tradition and thinking about how to apply it in a modern life, how to give it a little bit of modern twist so we can use it in our everyday life. That's where it comes adding more value to the traditional technique.
Right. And we're getting a few questions. I'm going to be picking a few from the audience. One that is coming is what other materials can it be printed on, or is it only applied on fabric?
そうですね。他にも素材、布だけじゃなくても染められますか？
メインは、長板中学の場合、特に藍で染めるということがあるので、天然の繊維、素材じゃないと染まらないので、基本的には木綿、朝、はい、シルクですね、それから絹。そのやっぱり大きくは化学繊維は染まらないので、はい、そういったことを仕事をしています。
So due to the indigo nature, Nagaita Chugata especially uses indigo, natural indigo, and natural indigo doesn't soak into the synthetics. So he has to use either cotton, linen, or silk, natural materials in order for the indigo dyeing to work. But Katagami っていう例もありますもんね。If you are taking this Ise Katagami technique, if you don't mind using other dyeing material, you could apply this Ise Katagami technique onto paper as well. This place is actually a showroom for people who want to incorporate Katagami patterns into their sliding doors or folding screens in our everyday in their houses using this Ise Katagami pattern onto a paper, Japanese washi paper. So it could be used as a home decor as well.
Interesting. Now we're getting very specific questions. I'm going to try to ask them as properly as possible. So one question is about how many bolts of Nagaita Chugata cloth does Matsubara-san produce per year, and how long to make each one of these bolts?
Bolts?
Rolls?
1年で作られる長い靴が、布の量
1年で作る量、注文があれば頑張って作るんですけどね。
Depending on how many orders he gets.
Okay. So maybe we'll get a few orders from the people following the session today.
そうですね。今日ね見てる方に注文いただいたら、
よろしくお願いします。
We're waiting.
Earlier you were mentioning the dyeing, that it happens on both sides and things have to be aligned properly, but it can also happen on one side, or different ways of applying it. Can you show us a bit of that?
That's great. ちょっと別の例の積み方の例を。そうですね。So this is a good example. You could dye this beautiful lattice pattern on one side with flowers, and then use different patterns on the other side, like dots, line of dots.
Wow.
And if you actually see it actually you can see it gives it a different atmosphere. You can actually see through the dots from this side as well. Okay. And if you only dye one side and not do anything on to the other side, actually it gives this refreshing indigo on the other side with pine patterns. And this is also another beautiful patterns that
is fantastic.
It's beautiful. Sakura cherry blossom on one side.
Can we take a step back for a moment? So let's say that the object we want to create is a kimono, like the one you are wearing, Tomo-chan. So how many craftspeople are involved in this process? So from zero, deciding to have a cloth, to finally someone made it and you can buy it in a shop.
It really depends how far you want to include. So craftsmen who make tools like the Ise Katagami that I've shown you as well.
Yes.
For the entire textile process.
So yeah, from
この1枚の、伊勢型紙を作る職人さんがいらっしゃって、伊勢型紙のね、その小型のを作る職人さんもいらっしゃって、染める方がいらっしゃって、仕立てる職人さんもいて、 全部の過程をでどれぐらいの職人さんが関わってたの？
もっと遡れば、
はいはい
その型紙を作る、地紙を作る人から
そうですよね。
だからそこ
そう
から
ですよね。
かなりもう遡ると、
Okay.
ものすごい人数、も
そうですよ
のすごい人の手が
考えられないですよ
かかるんで
ね。
すよね。で、その構造を、
はい
まずは刈り取ったり、それを紙の繊維を取って紙にして、で型紙の地紙を作って、それから型紙彫り師が彫って、でそこからの染めの人間ですから、何人の手になるんでしょうね。
So I was actually asking him and asking, so somebody has to make Ise Katagami stencil paper, but he said, wait, even before that, there's somebody who has actually grown the mulberry plant in order to create Japanese handmade washi paper. So if you start counting the people who grow plants, who harvest the plant, who actually takes out the extract, the fiber from the plants and make Japanese paper, and the people who layer it, and this Ise Katagami paper is actually coated with persimmon tanning, so who makes that, who applies that, it's countless layers of craftsmanship.
Wow.
And to me, it's really a good reminder every time, because this is like many layers, but everything we touch, like even my watch, so many layers of craftsmanship and human touch went under, and before I even able to appreciate it. It's a good reminder for all of us to just everything we touch in our everyday life. There's many human, thoughts and the consideration went, and makes me humble and grateful. That's my thought for today.
But I think that's a very important reflection, when we think about objects, and some of them could be handmade, but even if they're made industrially, there's been people involved in this process. There's been lots of decisions, and it's important to be mindful of all of this. A product is not just an isolated thing that exists. Someone brought it into existence.
Yes, and I think Katakoto no Kai really showcased that process, not entirely, sadly, but we are showing like a bit of layers, and I think that's unique in that sense.
Mm-hmm. And regarding the patterns, and then the application on cloth. So how does it work? Does he interact with the Ise Katagami makers of the stencil to decide which one to apply? Does he create his own? How is this relationship?
型紙職人さんと松原さん直接コンタクトを取ってこういう模様を作りたいんですってお話しされることもありますか？オーダーを出したりとか。Yes, he actually does have direct contact with the craftsman, Ise Katagami craftsmen, and order certain patterns. 例えば昔の方が古くなったらその修理
そうですね、掘り返しを頼んだり、そういうことも必要です。
And this, ちょっと持ってきますね。Sorry. Just wanted to bring it so you can see it. So this is persimmon tanning Ise Katagami, and it's very durable, but as he uses it, it maybe sometimes needs a repair, so he would ask Ise Katagami Shokunin craftsman to make a repair for the old Katagami as well, so he can reuse it as well.
Okay. There's another question regarding the dyeing. So someone is asking, if I apply dye to any piece of cloth, it bleeds through and dyes both sides. How do you dye only one side?
大体質問なんですけど、染めてる時ってこっちがこの片方だけに染めるっていうのはむしろどうやってやるんですかっていう質問。
さっきのそのいわゆるペースト、ライトペーストの部分っていうのは、その生地を透過しない、抜けないので、どうやら何かと違って、だから付着してるだけですから、表、さっきこれと同じですけど、裏に何もつけなければ表だけの柄です。江戸小物もそうですよね。表だけです。
So I don't know what, as I think I might be repeating myself, but if you apply register paste, this is the white part that will not be dyed at the end. And when the question is about when he dyes, it just bleaches through. So
yes, I think it's about bleeding. So sometimes when you apply, let's say you have a drawing of a line, a very fine line, and sometimes when you apply, dye to, let's say, cotton and stuff, it's very difficult to keep it straight, right? It bleeds through and it's not as precise.
Yeah, that's where the craftsmanship about I was thinking. やっぱりやっぱこう綺麗な線を出すっていうのが難しいんですってことだと、にじんじゃうっていうことで、だからそれどうするんですかっていう。
そうですか。にじまないような糊を作らなければいけないので。
So that's why you have to do the meticulous mixture of the resist base. You have to get it right. That's why I was talking with him earlier on the mixture of powder, rice powder, and brown, and the lime powder and the water. He actually mixes it by himself. And やっぱりその時の状況を見ながらとかですよね。He has to ask the weather, he has to feel the air and moisture, and then how he decides the ratio of the mixture. And I guess that's like it requires lots of craftsmanship.
Yes, and we have a very knowledgeable audience because someone also was answering that they believe the bleeding is also prevented through the usage of the daizu, the soybean liquid, right? So it's not as easy as it seems, the whole process. And I think that precision, attention to the quality of the materials, experience and knowledge are all things that you cannot skip. You know, they all have to be together at the same time.
まあ、ご汁でっていうプロセスの話とかもしましたけども、そういったことも結局そのプロセスはプロセスとしてあるんですけれども、この方に落ち着くまでにはそれのもう経験とか感とか、そのすごく集中してどこに気を配るかとか、そういうことの結晶ですよねっていう。
型紙をこうつなげていかなきゃいけないので、それがうまくつなげられなければ一旦つけられない。
And if you think about it, it has to be all continuously dyed onto the cloth. And if you think about it, that's also pretty amazing as well. You have to remember this part has to meticulously align with this part when you move the patterns on a white cloth, right? It requires lots of attention as well.
There's something I'm interested in. So, of course, this technique was developed hundreds of years ago for things that we now consider traditional, you know, things like kimono and specific patterns. But what kind of different applications are happening in today's age? And I wonder what kind of textiles he creates today for things that might not be kimono, and if he has any favorite applications.
今こういった布を使って他に着物以外にどういったものを作られたりしますか？
基本的にはこの伊勢型紙のサイズというのが日本のその反物にその即した幅なんですよね。だからそれ以外のことにやろうと思うと横につなげてみたり縦につなげたのまたこう複雑なつなげ方とその西洋でいう広幅やる幅というものには向かないですサイズ的に。そこから生地をまあ違うものにっていう形に洋服に仕立てる人もいますけど、はい。
So there are certain restrictions regarding this katagami. It has to, so it's not like suddenly you take this pattern, slide it onto something like really wide cloth, like double the size of this kimono, and it's not that easy actually. So you have to kind of think of the variations within this. So kimono has certain dimensions that's like easy. With this one dimension, can create the entire piece of kimono. And so this is something you can't really be free from. And within this restriction, you have your own creativity to make your piece of skirt if you like, or bag if you like. But this is something you have to kind of keep to.
I understand. And is there any specific pattern that he likes the most creating?
染めてて楽しい柄ってありますか？
難しい柄の方が楽しいかもしれません。
So the more demanding the technique is, he finds it more joyful. 例えばどれになりますそしたら？
どれになります？僕は今回1点しか出してないんですけど、やっぱりエッジ角がきちっと出るというのが型紙の話題でもあるので、そこをきちっと出せるのが楽しいです。
やっぱり両面でですよね。Let's go back to his work.
Yes.
This is the only work he's exhibiting this time, but what he enjoys the most is trying to get this edge clear cut. And if you remember, you have to do it on the other side as well with the perfect alignment. And when he achieves that, you get like really crisp white, and that's where he kind of finds a fulfillment.
Thank you. There's another question here, which is also a bit technical. So again, I'll do my best to ask it properly. Is there a difference in the dyeing process between the katagami using itoire and shibari?
So you can hear the sighs from the craftsmen. They're like really impressed. 糸入れとシャバリで、手がポリオリエンターがの違いはありますか？
糸入れはまさに糸を型紙の間に入れていく作業で、シャバリは片面だけに上から乗せて貼り付ける作業なので、まあシャバリのルーツが糸入れです。糸入れが変わってシャバリ。
やっぱりそれは効率的な。
そうですね。というのと、あとは糸入れという技術があまりにも高度で特殊なので、それをこう、なんていうんでしょう、覚えて、仕事としていく人が少なくなってきてしまったというのが一番大きな。
染める側としてはあまりどうですか？
島とかですね、そういう模様によっては糸入れでなければいけないような模様もあるんですよ。でも、シャバリで対応できるものは、どんどんシャバリに変わってきたというのが今の方が。
Okay. So let me just bring out the sample again. So if you remember, just for the regular audience like me, this is contains two or three layers of Japanese washi within this. And itoire is one technique to insert really fine thread between this paper so that this entire piece holds intact after applying this meticulous patterns, because it's really delicate work. But also the itoire process itself is such a technically demanding work that they started doing shibari, which is applying layers of thread on the surface once without having to insert in between these layers with Japanese washi. So the reason being that itoire is just such demanding, not many people are able to do it nowadays. They are kind of replace the technique with shibari. And when it comes to dyeing process, there are actually certain patterns that can only be dyed with itoire, the more demanding technique, such as stripes. So it still has to be itoire technique. But other dyeing patterns, other stencil patterns, you could actually do it either itoire or shibari. I hope your audience is happy now.
Thank you very much. So why don't we move into another of the shokunin in
Yes. I didn't think we're gonna be spending this long. So I hope you can just have a quick view of this another variety of works in this exhibition. And this part, if you have done the homework, this is the woven textile. This is also another particularly unique style from Saitama, and it's worth doing another session for.
I would have a kimono made out of that one, definitely.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful. It's actually Bali. And they're famous for Ichiro malt whiskey, so the pattern is made of malt. So this is also woven. Too. It's such a clear-cut circular patterns, but still made of woven textile. He actually took inspiration from my grandfather's work, so I'm really happy about it.
That's amazing.
This is a Sarasa textile, kakejiku hanging scroll for your tea room. And some of it incorporates batik dyeing technique from Indonesia as well. Okay.
Until when is the exhibition open?
6月3日まででしたっけ? 3rd of June. Come visit. I think, yes, Japan is opening our door to the, more foreigners and tourists. So if anybody makes it to Japan, Tokyo, please come visit. And it might be interesting if you realize these two are made from one same pattern. And this is another also experimental project. You see these birds and how it comes out differently with こちらですね。On this side, you can find the birds. So it's actually made from one same pattern. Collaborative work of Katakoto.
Okay, let's dive then into the creation of the patterns.
Yes. Okay, hi Jan. So here, let me introduce you another one of our, let's say, white star of the Katakoto No Kai. She is the Ise Katagami craftsman, Keiko, at work. You can see. Nasa, 今何してらっしゃるんですか? What are you working on right now?
今は着物用の型紙を彫っています。
So she's working on carving out design for kimono textile.
これは型紙の付き彫りという技法になります。
So katagami, Ise Katagami, there are actually three major styles of this carving out. And she's right now what she's doing is shiatsen cut. Can you see what she's doing well?
Yes, we can. It would be great if she could show us the tools she's using. I'm very curious about them.
Yes. 道具もちょっと見たいということで見せてもらえますか、那須さん。Yes, very sharp, small knife. And I have to say that she actually sharpens it by herself using this sharpening stone. She was just doing it. 自分で研ぐんですよね。はい。And やっぱり昔は刀を作る職人っていうのも別にいたんですかね。
いや、刀は鍛冶屋さんがこの研ぐ前の鋼を作って打って、鍛冶屋さんが作ってくれるだけで、やっぱり彫る人、職人さんが自分で砥石で研いで、研いで刃は自分でこの形にしていきます。
So it's part of the Ise Katagami craftsman Shokunin's work to actually sharpen the knife by herself. They actually get raw sort of piece of metal, raw metal from a blacksmith, and they make this tool by themselves and sharpen it. And one anecdote she was sharing me, she wants to get to this work, but she sometimes like cracks chips off her knife. And she has to spend like 3-4 hours just sharpening her knife when she was like really rushing to make her Ise Katagami work. So I'm just sometimes I wonder how stressful that can be. なんかこの前3-4時間研ぐ方に時間かけなきゃいけなくて実際にIse Katagamiを彫る方までいけなかったって話をたまに SNS とかでした。
そうですね。この刃は自分で研ぐんですが、研ぐのに6時間ぐらいかかったりすることもあるんですけど、調子が悪いと、数時間使ってるだけで折ってしまったりとかするので、また研ぎ直すのに時間がかかって大変だなと思います。
So she would normally spend 6 hours just sharpening her knife. And when she's not at her best, she would just chips off the edge. Like after using it for a couple of hours, and she would like, I have to do it. And I spend another 6 hours just sharpening a knife. And it's to me, it's such energy consuming work. But この伊勢型紙に惹かれた理由は何ですか？
そうですね。紙を切って作ってある、人が手でやってることなのに、こんなに繊細で美しいことができるってことにすごくびっくりして、また紙で布を染めてるってことが知らなかったので、そんなことできるんだってびっくりしました。それでやりたい。
I wanted to ask her what drew her into this Ise Katagami world. You know, what appealed to her, and she said that you can actually create this such delicate, meticulous pattern with hands. And before knowing Ise Katagami, she didn't know that textile could be dyed with a piece of paper, and that the fact itself was, appealing for her to step into this work.
Let's talk about
And
that.
you can see this. Yes.
Yeah, no. So let's talk about actually the material she is carving on. So you mentioned before that it was washi, Japanese paper, and multiple layers. But can you explain again how does the katagami get made and what it's made
Yes.
of?
So I'm just picking up one piece of katagami. So this これはだいたい2、3枚の和紙が重ねられているわけです。
1枚の型紙用のこの和紙、型地紙っていうんですけど、
はい
この型地紙がもともとは和紙が3枚とか
うん
2枚とかでできてます。
So this piece of katagami originally is 2 or 3 layers of really thin Japanese handmade washi paper stuck together and coated with parsimon tanning. And it's not just one time, sometimes twice, 3 times for durability. And as you can see, she is actually carving out. これ何枚ですか？
これは6枚ですね。はい。
6 of those tied together at the same time. And you can guess why, but because this is stencil work, if you are to incorporate multiple colors, you can only use one pattern paper for one color. So you probably need, multiple colors. So you have to have same patterns, not just one sheet of one pattern, but 5, 6, 7. でもやっぱ6枚ぐらいが最大ですか、一緒に。
私の技法でないまた細かい模様を彫る人は、10枚とか彫ることもできます。
Some craftsmen just have 10 sheets of Ise Katagami together at the same time. But she would usually, with her technique, 6 is around the maximum to cover that one thing.
And what about the patterns? How does she come up with the pattern she's now carving? Are there unique to her? Are there some that are passed on within a particular style or school?
この方っていうのは大体伝統的なものを作ってらっしゃるんですか？それともご自身で考えることもありますか？
仕事によってはお客様が型紙の元のものを提供してくださることがあって、それが長年ずっと使われている伝統的なものもあれば、デザイナーさんが考えた新しいデザインが仕事としてくることも両方あります。
So they're both. Sometimes she gets order from some clients who would want her to remake the traditional patterns, and some might ask her to make their own designs. That wasn't there before.
Yeah. And how long does it take her to from start to finish of carving a pattern, more or less?
例えばこの今のだったらこの一つ仕上げるのにどれぐらいかかります？
そうですね。まあ2、3週間ぐらい。
So let's say to complete this entire piece, 2 to 3 weeks. Because if she was at best without chipping off her knife, she would do it in 2 weeks.
Now, there's something we were talking in preparation for this, a saying from the time of Edo, what now is Tokyo, right? About fire and fighting. And so why don't you talk about that and, the availability, the collections, and the connection with Europe too?
Yes. So that's something that I found really enjoyable while researching for this project. But there's lots of influence from Japan to Europe and Europe to Japan as well. So I'm just going to hold it. We talked about this, but this entire pattern has to be all continuous. It's an open work design for this entire piece to be intact. So for that restriction, the patterns all have to be continuous. And that actually, I think the beauty was born out of this restriction. And that appealed to certain European artists. The end of 19th century, beginning of 20th century, artists like William Morris, René Laric, Alphonse Mucha. So they took on this inspiration and it contributed, it's been said that it's contributed to Art Nouveau movement. And these artist works are all loved by us Japanese of today as well. So this cultural confluence that's been going on over the century. And also Edo as a town was also famous for lots of fires. There is a saying in Japanese, fire and fighting is the flower of Edo. So Edo it used to be famous or infamous for having such short tempers. They would fight all the time. There's a fire in the town. And this is actually made of paper, so lots of them lost during the fire. And also in the 20th century, there was World War II, and there was also big Kanto earthquake and fire as well. So during that time, lots of these pieces were lost. But then again, because the European love for Japanese Ise Katagami, some of the substantial part of it actually made it to European museums. Now they are preserved in a European museum. So that's a cultural connection. And it's interesting that how even the time without airplane, we had such influence on each other.
And I'm curious about Nasu-san's work. So, which are the patterns that bring her the most joy, and what inspires her to create specific patterns?
作っていて楽しいこととか、こういうふうにやってみたいっていうものとかありますか？
そうですね。昔の作品、すごい昔の作品を見ていて、決してそこに職人さんの名前が入っているものはほとんどないんですけど、本当に見てて、足の力が抜けるほどすごすぎるって思うものがいっぱいあって、それぐらいその名前が残ってないのに、ものすごい技術を持っている人たちがいた世界なので、そういう人たちに私もなれたらいいなと。
So it's when she looks at some of the really old patterns that's still left today, there are some works that's just the literal translation of what she said. She would just she can't even stand looking at the work because it's just beyond her the technique that went in to realize the patterns. And when she sees such mastery and artistry of the technique, that really moves her. And she also mentioned that these are the works that you don't even put your name on it. You don't even know who made it. It's the unknown craftsman, but their technique is such beyond the level that inspires her to want to be like them. She wants to be one like them.
That's fantastic, and it's interesting to see how what we were talking about earlier, how many different craftspeople are needed, right? So you have the shokunin that creates the katagami, but of course someone before had to create the paper or have the plants that are not going to be used for the dyeing of the textile. So you need all this experience, but then all of them working together in a way, to go from the start to the finished product. And maybe we could now bring back Matsubara-san and have a conversation, the three of us, because one thing I'm very curious about is the interaction between these different craftspeople in the process.
やっぱりそれぞれの違う段階の職員さんに一緒に話を聞いてみたいと思いますので、松原さんもぜひまた。
So maybe the first thing is, let's talk about Katakoto no Kai as a collective, right? Because we've been mentioning that there's different people involved with different skills. So how does it work as a collective? What is their goal as a collective?
片言の会ってやっぱりそれぞれ違った分野ですとかの人たちが集まった会ってそこがすごく独特ですよって話を前にもしたんですけど、それがやっぱりみんなが集まることでどういうふうに何がやっぱりできるようになったと思いますか？
やっぱり手仕事にこだわっているということと、もう本来は型紙を作る人で、それを使って染める人、またそれを使う人が集まって、何かできないかというところからスタートしましたけれども、そういった思いが型紙好きな人、これは日本の中にいっぱいいるわけですけど、そういう人たちに徐々に浸透したのかなと思います。やっぱり型紙の良さだとか、型染めの面白さ、そういったものっていうのが伝わったらいいんじゃないかなと思います。
So we initially started this collective as people who make this katagami and the craftsman who dyes with this katagami and the people who wears and uses the textile that's been dyed with this technique. And that's how we started. But over the time, it seems to have had appeal to the people. They actually, just like European, it appealed to European artists abroad. It has appealed to us Japanese as well. And it's gradually word of mouth spread to the Japanese fans as well. And we are now able to communicate the joy and the fun of this katagami to the wider audience.
That's very interesting. So there was a question related to Nasu-san's work. Are the designs drawn on paper before it's carved, or is it just freestyle out of a reference?
この型を彫る前に図案っていうのを紙に書いたりするんでしょうか、それともフリースタイルで彫り始めたりもしますか？
と模様がある程度の面積で繰り返してできているものが多いので、まずはその繰り返している最小パターンを小さい型紙に起こしてから、それを図案として彫り始める本番用の着物用の型紙にかけて写して、それを図案にします。
So, I think this might be good example. One,
写ってある黒いのが。
if you notice, there are many repeated patterns on one entire piece. So what she actually do is they usually like come up the smallest unit of pattern they create, the smallest unit of pattern that they sort of repeat it to make the entire piece. So they come up with this small design and actually create, carve out the patterns and then just kind of spread onto the entire piece.
But is it designed drawn on the paper first, or is it out of her memory and imagination that she starts cutting without any reference?
その最初の図案っていうのは紙に書いたりするんですか？
そうです。手書きで書くものも多いです。
So for that, she would usually like use her hands to design on paper.
So, I mean, we addressed this before, but now that the three of you are sitting there, I'm curious about the new things that are coming out of these technique. Of course, times have changed. People are bringing their own interest and their own experience to this. So I wonder if through Katakoto No Kai's multidisciplinary approach, if either new patterns or new techniques are being evolved or created.
もう一回なんですね、こういったさまざまな人たちが集まっている中で、片言の会から生まれた新しい技術とか、新しい型だったり模様だったりとか、なんかそういう試みっていうのはありますか？
今回は特にデザイナーの熊谷さんが考えられた型紙を出すなので、数々の複数の人間が違う染め方でっていうものがコラボ作品として挑戦したりしているので、僕はそこが見どころかなと思います。
So I touched on a little bit earlier on, but there is actually one collaborative effort this time, which is kind of interesting to look out for. So we have a designer as a member for our group as well, and he came up with new patterns, and he asked her to carve it out, and she carved out Ise Katagami for it, and actually 4人でした。4人それぞれの染め方に挑戦するの。4種類。And 4 different craftsmen same pattern, and they dyed using their own technique, and each one came out so different. So it's something to look out for and compare it.
Interesting. There's another very specific question. Are there any horishi, who can do simabori now in Shiroko?
What body say again?
Are there any horishi who can do shimabori now in Shiroko?
一応はいいらっしゃいます。
Yes, there is. Yes.
だから糸入れもいます。
And there's a person, we talked about itoire process earlier on. There's somebody who can actually do itoire in Shirako as well for the shimabori. Shimabori stripe patterns. And for stripe patterns to be able to be carved out, we need the itoire shokunin as well. So they're both alive and active in Shirako.
Okay, to be fully honest, I don't have any idea of what I have just asked. I was just trying to be faithful to one of the questions that arrived.
Yeah. So shimabori, the stripe pattern carving out technique, is one of the most demanding, and for the dyeing process as well. That's why they need the itoire process that's like more durable, so that it will be dyeable when the dyeing craftsman comes. When it comes to dyeing process, and they have that one of the most demanding technique one of the artisans who can hold this demanding technique still alive in Shoko. One of the most, place where it holds the tradition.
There's a question we touched on this earlier, but it's probably good to make focus in it again. So the question is about are young people interested in this art and craft, and is there an interest to learn how to make it? Because there's no doubt that the product is beautiful, but we see how demanding learning the technique is. So are young people interested both in the art, kind of the final product, but also in learning?
I think I'll answer that myself from cultural translator point of view. I mentioned the textile. Textile has kind of become, kimono has become a little bit distant to us Japanese already as well. Therefore, all this technique seems so overwhelming and meticulous and demanding. But as myself, I've actually tried out the weaving. And when I did try the weaving, it actually gave me so much joy. And many young artists actually young people are actually realizing that fun of it as well. And he has many students comes to his studio as well. And you've seen some of the sort of modern art take over the traditional technique as well. So there are certain numbers of young people who are interested in exploring textiles. That's my answer.
Thank you very much. So we have just a couple of minutes left. I know that because you're setting up and stuff, you are all on a tight schedule. So I was wondering from each one of their points of views, if there's one thing they would like to transmit about their work and their craft to a wider audience, what would that be?
じゃあちょっとそろそろ締めの時間なんですけど、最後に2人から一言ずつこういった仕事を通じて、海外の人が伝えたいこととかあったら、一言ずつお願いいたします。
伊勢型紙を興味を持ってくださっている方っていうのが結構世界に広くいらっしゃるのかなっていうふうに感じていますけど、所蔵している方は多いんですが、生きている技術だってことを知らない人が多いので、今も作っているものだっていうことを片言の会を通じても知っていただければと思っています。
She's aware that Ise Katagami is actually loved by many audience, many collectors, but it's not just for the sake of collecting and putting on the shelves and appreciating it. It's actually alive. The technique is alive and it's used today as well. And it's something for her, for audience to know that it's actually, we are alive here right now and we are using this technique is not dead. And it's for us to keep it alive for the future generation as well. That's the message from her.
型紙は確かに古いものですけど、古くから伝わっているものですけれども、決して今古いものではなくて、今のものなんですよね。今のものを使って今の人が今の仕事としているということを知っていただけたらいいなと思っています。
In the same way, I think this was a really good opportunity for everyone to be, even for us to realize that we are using this current material and the current technique and the current people to have this all art come alive and on this stage, on this modern day, and use it in a modern everyday context. And this was something, it's a rare opportunity for us to be able to communicate that to a wider audience today. And thank you for that.
But actually, lots of thank yous to three of you are coming through the chat. So thank you very much for giving us a view behind the technique and how these products are created. I love to be there present today, and hopefully one day I'll be back and I'll be able to meet you. But thank you very much. People are applauding from everywhere. We have people in Europe, we have people in Australia, we have people in Japan. So this was a privilege. So thank you very much for the three of you of sharing this special preview of the Katakoto No Kai 5th exhibition in Tokyo.
Thank you. 皆さん、本当ヨーロッパとかオーストラリアから日本からも見て、すごく感謝のメッセージが今送られています。皆さん、本当に、
Thank you all very, very much.